Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Yuuei Survival Guide. This will be part 25, chapter 25. The end of term final exam sneaks up on Izuku, despite the fact that both of his guardians and all of his teachers reminded him nearly daily that it was fast approaching. Well, it didn't sneak up on him, but he feels woefully unprepared for it. He'd studied, alone, in groups with his friends, partnered with Hitoshi in Izuku's bedroom, with Oboro. He'd even roped his guardians into impromptu study sessions where he got them to quiz him, where they had the time to help at least. He'd had high hopes about getting at least a decent mark on the written part of the exam, but he'd been silently stewing over the exercise part of it. None of the teachers had said anything about it, and what it entailed, they'd gotten a few to no hints at all, no clues. Shota had said that without a doubt they'd have some knowledge of the exercise test, but that doesn't really dwindle their options of what this test could actually entail down much. They've done a lot in the first couple of months. They didn't know if they were to fight robots like in the entrance exam, or each other like in those battle trials on the second day of classes, or he's not even sure what else they could possibly be doing. He knows it'll be hard, though. This is Yuuei High School, and they're training to be heroes. Of course it'll be grueling and difficult. Izuku knows that Principal Nezu and the teachers will find a way to really test them. He just doesn't know how they'll do it. It's hard to prepare yourself for something so vast. This exercise portion of the exam could literally be anything. He knows better than to ask his guardians, and honestly, he doesn't want any handouts. He wants it to be fair. He wants to find out at the same time as the rest of his peers. He doesn't want extra help, not when it'll put him at an advantage that none of his friends and classmates will get. Plus, he knows his guardians won't tell him anything. They'd probably be disappointed in him too, and he definitely doesn't want that. He can study as much as he'd like for the written aspect. He can do as well as to ace it, hopefully, but in the end he can still draw the short straw when it comes to the exercise portion of the exam. He can still fail that, depending on what it happens to be, and the thought's been nagging him since it was announced. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't real-life combat battle simulations against their teachers. He'd mentally psyched himself up for a lot, but he hadn't expected something like this. Not only did his final grade depend on his actions, knowledge, and fighting, but it also depended on who he was partnered with and who he was facing off against. Because they were partnering up and battling one of their teachers in pairs. One of their pro-hero teachers. And of course he'd be partnered with Kacchan and facing off against All Might. He'd expected a hard fight walking into it. Not only were he and Kacchan not on particularly good terms, despite the fact that they'd had a heart-to-heart and cleared some of their misunderstandings, Kacchan hadn't changed at all when it came to his attitude at school, and his fierce determination to surpass both Izuku and All Might and become the #1 hero. They're hardly seconds into the exam when Kacchan gives Izuku a sharp shove and in order for Izuku to stop talking. Eyes narrowed in annoyance that cut the green-haired teen's attempts at strategizing off. Kacchan's clearly not on board with the notion to get to the escape door. The ashen-haired teenager's lips curl in a snarl as he continues on, announcing that he doesn't need Izuku's help in the first place to win the fight. Izuku can't help but snap at his childhood friend like this. The anger, the bad attitude is why no one likes him. It's said in the heat of the moment, and Izuku honestly doesn't mean it. He's just frustrated that Katsuki isn't taking this seriously, that he doesn't look at this partnership as the advantage that it is. Neither of them alone can take out All Might. It's just not logical, but together, maybe they have a shot. It's in one ear and out the other, as it tends to be when Katsuki's riled up. The argument between them is a wrench thrown into Izuku's plan of a clean escape victory, not to mention the fact that All Might was not going easy on them in the slightest. If Izuku couldn't see the super compact weighted bracelets on All Might's wrists and ankles as a handicap of sorts to attempt at leveling the playing field slightly, he might have assumed the pro had just forgone them. All Might was powerful. It was no surprise, now that he was Japan's #1 hero with this unrivaled power. Unfortunately, that just seemed to piss Kacchan off. Looking at it from a strategical standpoint, their best bet was to win and pass the exam by avoiding All Might at all costs, and to go down the escape and flee path. They're greatly outpowered. And All Might isn't the #1 hero for nothing. Izuku knows they should escape while they can, while there's the chance to, but when has Katsuki ever listened to him? Izuku just curses under his breath as he follows his childhood friend into a fight that he knows they're at a disadvantage in, despite the handicap on the opposing side. All Might does not go easy on them in the slightest, not that he expected any of their pro teachers to. Still, he might go just a tiny bit overboard. The pro plays his part far too well, declaring that he's a villain and that collateral damage to the surrounding area, a mock town, means nothing to him, which is a very villainous thing to say. There's hardly a second to strategize before the pro is charging at them. Izuku tries to convince Kacchan to flee with him again, but it's in vain. They're going to lose, and fail the exam at this rate. How will he be able to look the number 1 pro in the eyes if he does fail this? Or Shota, when the man hears that Izuku had lost? The pressure riding on this examination is suffocating. It's not just a win or fail sort of thing. Not for Izuku. He needs to prove himself. He needs to pass. There's so much riding on this, so many people cheering him on, and he can't fail and let them down. Too many people have put so much time and effort into helping him, and he refuses to let that go to waste, for them to think, even just for a second, that it hadn't helped in the long run. They almost lose within the first 5 minutes. Kacchan gets cocky and overconfident, and the idiot doesn't see the danger. He's too confident to. Before Izuku knows, All Might has Kacchan pinned under him and Izuku stuck under guardrails. For a second it seemed hopeless, as Kacchan spouts out nonsense about preferring to lose over putting his trust into a teammate. They only make an escape when Izuku uses full cowl to free himself from the guardrail confines. It's not entirely sure how he manages to get Kacchan out of All Might's grasp, but he does, and then he's running, angry blonde, along for the ride. Izuku tries to talk some sense into his hard-headed childhood friend, but he's not entirely sure it really works. Kacchan is stubborn, even more so when it involves Izuku trying to convince him. They come to an almost silent truce between the two of them. There's trial and error to their partnership, team-building and arguments. Izuku and Kacchan had never really seen eye to eye, not since that quirkless diagnosis 11 years ago, but for now, just for this, it appears his classmate is willing to put the effort in to try on an equal playing field. They come up with some good strategies. Kacchan lets Izuku use one of his grenade bracers, and in doing so, they finally get something over on All Might. It's small in the long run, but it feels good. It feels like this isn't entirely in vain, and that they might even have a chance at making it out of the exam with a passing grade. With All Might momentarily distracted, they dash toward the escape gate. They don't make it far. The window of time to rush out the exit door unscathed has closed, and now they're left to fight. All Might is on them now, and he's not going to go easy on them in the slightest. He won't let them just escape. So they fight. All Might praises them and their ability to work together despite the well-known rivalry the two have. Izuku knows that the pro is speaking honestly. He really is proud of the progress, but he still can't help but feel that it's almost mocking to be praising them during a fight, during an exam. The praise is followed by All Might announcing that the two of them have been paired together, forced to work together if they want a passing grade. It's just a prerequisite of the practical exam. It's more of a blow considering that All Might has both of them pinned as he tells them that. Izuku feels so stupid for not thinking about why they'd been paired together in the first place. Their rivalry is, after all, common knowledge, and if they can't work together in something like this, an important exam that they could very well make or break their futures as heroes, then they can't be trusted to work together and interact like civil human beings out in the real world where it really matters. Nothing their teachers do is out of coincidence. Izuku should really start taking that into account. Izuku's not sure how All Might gets them both pinned so fast, how he destroys Kacchan's grenade bracers easily, with a casual yet mocking reminder that the weight bracelets are forcing him to use only a minuscule amount of strength, and Izuku swears his heart drops into his stomach at the reminder. All Might had smashed Kacchan's gear like a peanut, and he did only have access to a bare minimum of strength for that. Izuku's hardly aware of the rest of the exam. He's in pain, and his thoughts are moving too fast for even him to keep up with. All Might is quick and smart, and he's making a point to reinforce the fact that he's superior. The rest of the exam is grueling. There's explosions and more pain. He faintly remembers a panicked attempt at using Full Cowl again, but All Might stops him by throwing him against the ground. All Might throws Izuku around like a weightless rag doll, and his wheezes are coming out as breaths, and he's slammed to the ground and into buildings as All Might even uses his New Hampshire smash and blasts him into Izuku. Izuku feels like he might black out under the pain and weight of the pro. There's a few times in that period of time that Izuku thinks they're done for, but somehow they keep going. They keep fighting. Izuku struggles to his feet, hardly even aware of the fact that Kacchan and All Might are talking at all. He barely even hears his childhood friend demand that Izuku get up and escape. He sees explosions out of the corner of his eye, and it's a long second before Izuku's rattled brain comes to the conclusion that Kacchan is sacrificing himself for their grade, so Izuku can make it to the escape gate while he distracts the pro. When Izuku's finally standing up, wobbling from the ache in his whole body, he activates Full Cowl ready to charge for the escape gate. But he can't. Kacchan is urging him on from under All Might, and the pro himself is preparing to attack Izuku now to ensure that he doesn't escape, but he freezes in place when All Might forces Kacchan into the ground. How can he leave? Kachan's in trouble, and this may be just an exam, and this may be all fake-ish, considering All Might is their teacher and they're really in no actual danger. It's not a real villain fight, but it sure feels like it is. But how is he supposed to just flee when his partner is in trouble? What kind of hero would that make him? Izuku's not entirely sure where the idea to punch All Might across the face comes from. All Might recoils back, both in surprise and from the force. Izuku uses that second of recoil to grab his partner and sprint towards the escape gate, towing Kachan, who is now unconscious, along with him. Izuku passes through the gate, and it feels like he can suddenly breathe again. He settles Kachan down gently beside him and collapses after him, huffing heavy breaths. They'd passed. Izuku's recollection is a bit fuzzy after that. He'd had hazy memories of All Might smiling proudly down at him before he's scooping both teenagers into his arms carefully. The next thing he knows is that recovered girl has her tent there, and he's no longer feeling like he'd been in a New Hampshire smash through a couple of walls and the floor. The teen hides a smile behind his hand as he listens to Recovery Girl scolding All Might for not restraining himself. All Might bows his head sheepishly as Izuku shifts on the cot that he'd woken up on. He'd been given permission from the youthful heroine to stick around and watch the rest of the exams, despite the lingering pain and exhaustion. He's awake and alert, that's all that matters, even if Recovery Girl had begrudgingly agreed, even though he knows that she'd rather send him back to Yuuei to recover in peace. "Oh," the woman calls over to the pro, who freezes in the doorway, clutching a still unconscious Katsuki in his arms. "I'd watch out for Aizawa and Yamada if I were you, Yagi," she continues after a second, glancing at Izuku, where she gives a light smile, voice humored. "I can only imagine. Aizawa won't be very pleased to see the lengths that you went to against these two boys when he watches the recordings back, and, well, Yamada's quite fond of his favorite little listener, now isn't he?" Izuku's not quite sure he's ever seen All Might's expression drop quite so quickly. Izuku lets out a quiet laugh as the look on All Might's face at the mention of Aizawa-sensei and Present Mike being upset with him. It's hilarious that even Japan's #1 hero is afraid of Shota and Hisashi. The pro leaves quickly after that, eyes wide and shifty, like Shota will spring out of nowhere and the #1 hero will be roped into his capture weapon. All in all, the exams went fairly well. Oboro, who'd been banned from even watching Izuku's practical exam in fear that they'll have another sports festival incident on their hands, had bounced between Hisashi and Shota's own fights against their students. He recounts the funny bits, Hisashi screaming as he was covered by Kota's army of insects, and Shota's face of impressed uncertainty as Yaoyorozu launched flash grenades hidden in Russian nesting dolls at him. Oboro bounces on his heels at Izuku's side, while the teen watches the rest of the battles unfolding on Recovery Girl screens. Hisashi, Jiro, and Kota are just finishing up their fight when Oboro arrives in, probably joining them now since Recovery Girl had just announced Izuku and Kachan's victory, and he knows Shota had already finished his battle against Todoroki and Yaoyorozu, since Recovery Girl announced it while they'd been fighting against All Might. At the end of the exam period, just 4 of Izuku's classmates fail the exam. Izuku feels awful that Kaminari, Kirishima, Ashido, and Sato had all failed. He doesn't know what that means for them, but he is hopeful that they'll be able to pass whatever comes next. Everyone meets back up at Yuuei when the examinations are done. No one is overly injured besides scrapes and bruises, well, except for Katsuki, who just recently had come back to consciousness, and Izuku, who sure feels like there's a harrowing battle in his muscles. Shota is less than pleased to see Izuku and Katsuki in the states they're in when he arrives back at the school. Though both teens are healed, there's still lingering bruising and stiff pain. Plus, Izuku's sure that Shota had talked with Recovery Girl after the exams were finished. Aizawa makes a good point that none of the other examinees had come out of the test as beaten up as Katsuki and Izuku were. All Might looks thoroughly scolded at just the simple, stiff observation from Shota, and Izuku knows that All Might should just be glad Hisashi is still in the shower in an attempt to wash the feeling of bugs on his skin away. He'd just hit the hour mark of his shower, according to Shota. He'd seen Hisashi angry with All Might that day he'd come out of the conference room with the man after the argument they had, and he honestly believes Oboro when the ghost says that Hisashi can be way scarier than Shota. The class is thankfully dismissed early after everyone's regrouped in 1A's classroom. They know now who'd passed and failed simply from seeing each other's faces, either twisted with exhaustion but elated or crippled with defeat. Shota assures them after he's reviewed the videos and written exams, they'll get their final overall grade. They haven't seen their written exam grades yet, but they do know where they stand in the practical portion simply by the outcome today. No one failed the written portion of the exam, he tells them with a bored look, but a few of you did fail the practical today. Now, you will all be going to the Forest Lodge. The consequences of not being allowed to attend the trip was just a logical ruse to ensure you all did your best today. The man pauses, eyeing them before that scary smile is curling onto his face. And I forgot to mention, the Forest Lodge is actually a boot camp. Another rational deception. Those of you who failed the practical test will be subjected to harsher training as a consequence. I assume you're all up to the challenge. Shota looks pleased at the groans from his class. Not only did they fail and fall for another logical ruse, but their fun camping trip has been spun around into additional training. Izuku thinks that they should just start suspecting everything is twisted around in a way that'll end up being educational or disguised as training. You're all dismissed. Take one of these lodge guides before you leave. Make sure you have all the necessary items before the trip. The man surveys over them with an unreadable expression, but no one lingers long enough to notice. Well, besides Izuku. One of these days, we'll catch on to your so-called logical ruses, Izuku mumbles under his breath. Shota breathes out a puff of laughter, one eyebrow arching challengingly. Fool you once, shame on me. Fool you twice, shame on you. Fool you 3 times, well. Shota gives him a tiny, teasing smile. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Izuku lets out a humored snort as he tucks his hands into the pockets of his slacks and he follows his guardian out of the empty class. Shota and Izuku wait in the teacher's lounge for another good half an hour before Hisashi finally steps out of the faculty restroom, dressed in a spare set of civilian clothes with his hair down and wet. He's holding his hero costume and a plastic bag away from his body, grimacing like bugs will crawl out of the sealed knot and attack him. Shota heaves a sigh as he takes the bag from his husband, and Hisashi's tense frame eases when the bag is out of his hold. He still shoots an uncertain, skeptical glances, even as he steps away from Shota and the bag entirely. Then his eyes fall on Izuku, who hadn't gotten up off the couch just yet. Sheesh, sunshine. Hisashi frowns as his eyes trail over the teen's small frame. Rough day? You look like you got hit by a bus. More like a meteorite crashed into him. Shota scoffs, eyeing the teen's bruises distastefully. Yagi smashed him into the ground, multiple times, and he did quite a number on Bakugo, too. Shota relays it bluntly before Izuku can even open his mouth. He what? The blonde stiffens back up, glance shooting from his husband to his foster child. Izuku sees a glint of what he can only call danger in Hisashi's eyes, and he really doesn't want any more fights, not today at least. This was a test, not an actual villain fight. Why the hell would he go that hard on a first year? It's all right. Izuku waves his hands around frantically. I'm fine now, and, Shota and Recovery Girl already scolded him. Besides, it was a challenge, a good challenge for Kacchan and I, and, all that really matters is that we passed, right? Yes. Shota finally relents after a tense moment of silence. You're right. We're very proud, Problem Child. I'm sure your victory was very noteworthy, and I'm positive I'll fear for your life on more than one occasion when I watch it back. According to Recovery Girl's passing comments, at least. Do not show me that video. Hisashi's eyebrows furrow, a frown pulling at his lips. I don't think my heart could take it. Honestly, I still don't know how All Might's even allowed in a school, let alone allowed to teach them. Who goes full-on force on a first-year student anyways? He wore the bracelets, Izuku assures as he finally stands up, stretching out his stiff back. He was handicapped, just like the rest of the teachers. It was fair. He definitely should have had more of a handicap. His overpowered quirk was an oversight. Shota shakes his head. He sighs heavily and adjusts his hold on the bag of Hisashi's costume, making the blonde jump in surprise and step away from him. Shota just blows out an amused breath as he quirks his lip upwards. It's too late now. What's done is done. We know for next time now, though. Even Nezu wasn't as cruel to his students. Kaminari and Ashido failed, Izuku deadpans. But they were unscathed. Physically, at least. Shota shrugs with a light smile. I can't say the same about you and Bakugo. But we passed, Izuku reminds lightly as he shuffles along behind his guardians. My kiddos were perfectly fine. Hisashi grins between them, chest puffing out proudly. And they passed, too. It was a near-perfect exam, if I do say so myself. Says the man who just spent the last hour and a half in the shower after his near-perfect exam. Your kids beat you with nothing more than a couple bugs. A couple? Hisashi yelps dramatically, turning to gape at his expressionless husband. That was an army of bugs, all over me, crawling on me. Gross. Bugs are icky, Shota, and like you did any better, Todoroki and Yagirozu beat you too, pretty fast. I know. Shota offers no additional argument, just lets out a small, proud smile. They did well. "Aw, a proud dad," is whispered behind Izuku. The green-haired teen physically chokes back a noise that's somewhere between a gasp and a startled burst of laughter. He'd almost forgotten Oboro had been waiting with them, too. How cute. Izuku's very glad that his teachers do not hear the ghost. Oboro falls into step beside Izuku, grinning widely, obviously proud of the fact that he had gotten so close to making the younger teen laugh. It's that night that Izuku gets a text invitation to the mall, though. His night had been thankfully uneventful, his guardians just as drained as he felt. Hisashi all but demanded he take a nice long hot bath to ease his tense and aching muscles, and Izuku had never been more appreciative as he relaxed completely in the steaming water. He hadn't known he needed it until after he was shoulder deep in the bathtub. Following that, they'd had a celebratory katsudan delivered to the apartment. It hadn't compared to Hisashi's homemade version in the slightest, but it still tasted fine. The early bedtime is entirely his choice, and it's so nice to just collapse in his bed and cover himself in warm, fuzzy blankets. He's tired and worn out, still bruised and sore, but it's so much better now than it had been. He's lying in bed, nearly asleep, ready to let the day be over when his phone chimes with an incoming message. He's not surprised to see Uraraka's name flash across his screen. Very few people actually text him, despite the fact that he has half of the classmates' numbers. Who's texting you?" Oboro asks with half-hearted interest from the desk. He's sitting at Izuku's desk, a book laid open on the desktop. The ghost doesn't even look up when he speaks, but to be fair, Izuku's lidded eyes are on his phone. "Uraraka," Izuku tells the ghost with a yawn, shifting so he's leaning on his elbow and can actually read the message on his lock screen. "I guess a lot of us don't have some of the stuff showed at once for the boot camp, so Hagakure suggested we make a day of it and all meet up at the mall to shop tomorrow." "Oh, yeah?" Oboro finally looks up from his book. "You gonna go? Sounds like it could be fun, yeah?" "We haven't all really hung out together yet, but I think most of the class is on board, at least according to Uraraka." Izuku shrugged, stifling another yawn. "I'll ask in the morning." "I doubt they'll have a problem with it," Oboro snorts out, looking back down at his book. "Yeah," Izuku hums out, not interacting with the notification at all. He's not awake enough to trust himself not to text something stupid back. He's sure he won't mind a morning text back. He plugs in his phone and finally collapses back into his pillows. His guardians do not have a problem with it. Hisashi is more than enthusiastic to drop Izuku off at the mall on the way to his radio station to do the behind-the-scenes work for his show. He tells Izuku all about it on the drive to the mall, but despite his attention, Izuku's not sure what the majority of it means. Most of his class had gathered. When he arrives, everyone but Todoroki and Kacchan agreed to come, so they wait for the stragglers to arrive before anything's decided. To Izuku's surprise, everyone splits up when everyone's there. It's reasonable, since everyone needs different things, but he thought that they suggested a group hangout. The group would actually, well, hang out. Everyone splits off into small groups and pairs, and soon it's just Izuku and Uraraka left. Not that he minds. He likes her. She's probably one of his closest school friends, not to mention the first friend he'd actually had besides Kacchan, who didn't really count. Izuku himself doesn't really need anything on Shota's guide list, since Hisashi assured him that anything he might need they had extras of, since every year Shota chaperones the boot camp, something is always missing, then rebought only to be found after the boot camp's over. Since everything's already there, Izuku had accepted the invitation under the notion of getting to know his classmates and to take the opportunity to find some wrist weights for his workouts and training. Singing All Might Do as he'd done while also suffering with the handicap had put some things into perspective for him. Uraraka's looking for items on Shota's list, mainly bug repellent. Izuku has half a mind to tag along with her, even though he doesn't need the bug repellent at all. Hisashi has a whole stash of it, but before he can even suggest it, she's running off, much to his confusion. He doesn't follow her, just cocks his head to the side and watches the girl disappear in the crowd. "Well?" "I don't think your classmates know the definition of hang out," Oboro chimes from behind Izuku, a disappointed frown present on his face. "Why make it a class activity if everyone's just going to do their own thing?" The teen shrugs, shifting where he stood. "Oh." Izuku stiffens as someone's arm wraps around his shoulder, tugging him into someone's side. He doesn't recognize the voice, and he knows for certain it isn't one of his classmates. They'd all just left. "It's someone from Yuuei. Cool." The voice is deep and unfamiliar, as is the body that tugs him closer. "Izuku." Oboro's voice is cautious and clipped. "Do you know this guy? And weren't you also one of the guys who were running into the hero killer in the incident in Hosu?" A strike of fear runs up Izuku's spine. This person knows about that? No one's supposed to. None of them were even mentioned in the media coverage following the Hosu incident. According to the police chief in Endeavor, who'd been the face of the arrest, it was an underground hero who caught the murderer, not 3 high school students. How does this person know something so confidential? You know, the arm around his shoulder shifts so it's more around his neck and tightens faintly. Imagine my luck to run into one of you hero kids for the 2nd time. Izuku stiffens. The second it clicks just who's clutching him, the hooded figure seems to realize he's been found out by the soft bout of sadistic laughter. Izuku turns his head enough to see a crooked grin that's bordering on psychotic, and frantic red eyes. Pale hair falls into the figure's face, but Izuku doesn't need a full view to know. The voice and the hooded man's pale hair click together. He hadn't seen this man's face before. He'd just seen his hands. One hand stuck on his face, and he'd only seen him once, at the USJ, where Shota had almost died. Izuku's heart stutters in his chest as the figure's name clouds his thoughts. Shigaraki Tomura, the leader of the League of Villains. Oh no. Fuck! Oboro gasps behind Izuku, and the green-haired teen knows he's now come to the same conclusion. Oh my god, fuck, Izuku, you need to get away from him. And he would, definitely, if 4 fingers didn't circle around his neck casually. Act casual, like I'm an old friend, Shigaraki demands him, easily. Last remaining finger is lifted, waving back and forth threateningly. I want to talk to you. Shigaraki explains his quirk, under his breath, just for Izuku's ears, even though Izuku already gets the gist of it. He'd seen what it can do. He'd seen what it had done to Shota's elbow, the thoughts of his sensei's elbow crumbling away, and the mental image of Asui turning to dust as his side swirls in his head, and he can't help the nervous swallow. Izuku puts up a fight at first, threatens what he assumes Shigaraki already knows, that if he uses his quirk a hero will come, but it's a weak defense. At that point Izuku would already be dying, or dead, and all these innocent civilians would be in danger. He can't do that. The fight leaves Izuku's body. What do you want to talk about? Izuku lets the villain lead him along. For a guy holding someone hostage, Shigaraki doesn't appear to be in much of a hurry, as he directs Izuku along, fingers tightening and relaxing around his neck rhythmically, almost as if reflexes are subconscious. Shigaraki finds a nice spot for them to chat in the center of the mall, sitting directly in the plaza. They talk about Stain at first, and Izuku tries not to be confused. Shigaraki does most of the talking, or maybe venting would be a more fitting word. Izuku learns some interesting information, like the fact that the hero killer was not a member of the League. Izuku just doesn't understand Shigaraki, nor the sudden interest the villain has in Stain. What makes us so different? Shigaraki muses thoughtfully, his fingers tensing around Izuku's neck. That hero killer and I. Why does he get all the fame and recognition when we don't get shit? We infiltrated Yuuei High School for fuck's sake, and he gets all the glory for killing a couple of pros. You're nothing alike, Izuku forces out, hoping his voice doesn't betray how afraid he truly is at the mercy of a villain with a powerful quirk, with no heroes in sight. He's not exactly sure how to answer, can hardly think straight with death hanging over his head. I don't understand you, Shigaraki. I don't understand, and I don't accept your actions. It's wrong. You're cruel and ruthless. You want to cause chaos in the world. Izuku, Oboro warns slowly, hovering close to Izuku. He looks ready to lurch forward and use their quirks at a moment's notice, but Izuku knows that'll end worse. Shigaraki had seen the clouds at the USJ. They'd foiled his plans and pissed him off. Izuku doesn't need the villain knowing they came from him, not when he'd already had laid himself in the villain's hand. Don't piss him off. Please, be careful about what you say. And I don't accept Stain's actions either. It's wrong, too. He was wrong. But I understand why he did it. Oh? Curiosity curls in the villain's tone, and he turns his face to look at Izuku closer, studying him from the side. And why did he do it? Why understand him and not me? He and I are the same, Midoriya Izuku. Oboro sucks in a shuddered breath behind Izuku, but the teen manages to keep his own breathing slow and calm. Stain didn't destroy because he wanted to, Izuku swallows. He destroyed in order to try and change the world for the better, at least according to his own ideals. I respect him a bit. I still don't agree with the means of doing so, but I do understand. Respect, Shigaraki snarls out. He gets respect for killing a bunch of heroes? Is that what you're trying to understand, little hero? I could do that too. Where's my respect? No, Izuku shakes his head instantly. I respect him for living according to his ideals and not giving up. I respect him trying to change the world, even if how he did it was wrong. I'll never accept someone taking someone else's life, but I understand him. We're more alike than I care to admit. Both of us were inspired by All Might, and we both want to change the world. Stain just took it into his own hands and lived too narrowly by his own ideals. I see the harm in what he's done, and I don't accept it. We're the same, but we also couldn't be more different. I see. All Might. Shigaraki growls the name distastefully. It always comes back to All Might. I hate him. That stuck-up piece of shit. I hate that undermining idiot Stain. And I hate you, Disciple. I should have noticed sooner. It's always been about All Might. Izuku's jaw snaps shut, body wanting to recoil at the villain's words. This is not a very good conversation shift. Izuku already knows that Shigaraki hates All Might. It was a bad idea to bring him up at all. The villain's quiet for a second, eyes darting around between mall patrons. Izuku feels Shigaraki tense his arm faintly around his shoulders, and his pointer finger makes rapid taps, middle finger still raised, completely still. I'm rather curious about you, Disciple, Shigaraki tells him slowly. All Might's personal little brat. I saw how he treated you. Spoke to you at the USJ. It was different from how he treated those other hero brats. I just assumed at first that you were one of those dedicated fanboys who worship the ground that bastard walks on, and then I saw your freakishly powerful quirk. Infuriatingly powerful, just like his. Still, I thought you were just another hopeless All Might follower trying to be something you're not. But I'm not so sure anymore. Now, that begs the question of, what does that heroic piece of shit see in you? Please, Oboro whispers. Don't answer him, Izuku. He's dangerous. Just don't give him anything else. You're good, I'll give you that. Shigaraki sniffs indifferently, and despite the words coming out almost like a compliment, Izuku can't help but feel like they're more a warning. You almost managed to hit me. That was heroic. An attempt at saving those useless hero students in that single moment of confusion. I'd probably be a goner if it weren't for my faithful Nomu taking that hit for me like a good little creature it was. Izuku swallows, willing his heartbeat and breathing to stay on pattern. Shigaraki doesn't appear to be actually talking to him, just speaking to someone who's listening. And evading my Nomu's attack. You should be dead. A pause, the villain's hand tightens around his neck for a few long seconds. Izuku can't see, but Oboro freezes. Completely, a couple times, so Izuku can only assume Shigaraki's fifth finger is wavering downwards. But you're not. You survived by the skin of your teeth, Disciple. Saved by those clouds. The villain growls out the word in disgust, and Oboro tenses, hand hovering just over Izuku's shoulder. Izuku prays Oboro doesn't take the unintended bait. Shigaraki can't know about the quirk. Shigaraki seems to shake himself out of his thoughts, head turning faintly to glare at Izuku. Sensei might not have much interest in you, but I do. I don't know what All Might sees in you, why he's so interested, Midoriya Izuku, but I plan to find out. Izuku stiffens, whole body tensing up. He feels the man's hand close in, and he almost feels that fifth finger ghost over his neck. Deku! The hand around his neck goes slack, but not enough that Izuku feels confident in breaking away without risking Shigaraki pressing his fingers down before he's free. Still, he draws in a shaky breath that he hadn't known he'd been holding. And with that little bit of freedom. Deku! Uraraka slows to a stop beside the bench that Izuku's held hostage at. She slowly takes in the scene with a growing frown and a furrow of her eyebrows. Who's your friend? Uraraka, Izuku manages to force out, holding back a wince as Shigaraki pulls him in closer. You need to... Oh, the man chirps, tightening his hold even more to the point that Izuku really can't breathe. It's a silent warning that Izuku takes to heart, words dying in his throat as he clamps his mouth shut. Man, Midoriya, I didn't realize you were here with your friends. My bad. Sorry for interrupting your shopping. All at once the arm around his shoulders is gone, and the fingers threatening his throat disappear along with it. Izuku breathes in a heavy, desperate breath now that he can, one hand coming up to grasp at his own throat. Uraraka moves closer, putting herself almost between Izuku and the man that she seems to have decided is probably not a friend. Shigaraki turns to leave, but he pauses before he's even a step away, turning to eye the two students before his gaze settles and narrows on Izuku. If you know what's good for you, disciple, you won't follow me. I'd hate to think about what all these innocent civilians would do with a villain desperate for escape on the loose. The villain warns easily, voice low and only heard by the two students. Uraraka shuffles even closer, mouth pressed in a straight line as Shigaraki takes a couple measured steps away from them. Shigaraki, wait! Izuku pushes himself up, but doesn't dare take a step towards the villain. Shigaraki pauses, turning towards him in a half-hearted interest, one eyebrow cocking in an attempt for allowing the teen to speak. What is all for one's endgame? The villain eyes Izuku up and down, gaze crawling from the teen's head to his feet before lifting once again. He shifts, his arms crossing loosely over his chest as his gaze settles once more on Izuku's face. Don't know, the villain shrugs. Don't care. And then he's turning away, steps finally carrying him away as well, but not before he looks over his shoulder with that same manic grin that he'd worn when Izuku had pieced together his identity, voice calling out casually but deep and terrifying. Oh, and Midoriya. Take care of yourself. The next time we meet, I will kill you. It's no fun if you don't put up a fight. And then he's gone, disappearing into the crowds. When Izuku finally catches his breath, his heart thundering with adrenaline in his chest, he glances over to see Uraraka already has her phone pressed to her ear. She's talking low and hushed, but Izuku can piece together who she's talking to, just from the worried looks that she keeps shooting in his direction. Definitely the police. I am so glad you're okay, Obra wheezes at Izuku's side, his hands still hovering around him like he's desperate to touch the teen. I think I almost had a heart attack. Yeah, Izuku too. The police arriving at the mall is a bit of a blur for Izuku. He's thankful Uraraka takes control of the situation because, frankly, Izuku feels like he might black out after the adrenaline starts to wane. Their classmates regroup quite fast, and Izuku assumes it's because the text Uraraka had sent out. A warning for the class to be on the lookout, but not engage if they happen to spot Shigaraki. That's what the dispatch officer had told her to do, at least. It feels like Izuku blinks, and suddenly he's surrounded by worried classmates. He wants to open his mouth and assure that he's fine, but when he does, no words come out. He's never felt like this before, never wanted to speak, assure, and he's not been able to. He closes his mouth with a stuttered sigh, and he lets himself feel protected by 17 heroic students circling around him. They're no match for Shigaraki, he knows. None of them are yet, but he still lets himself relax knowing that they're watching over him. He trusts his classmates. The police arrive shortly after. They're all regrouping, and the class talks in hushed, worried voices. Izuku can't force out the description of the villain when asked. Even though he knows it would greatly help with the search. The police are combing the mall for the villain, but without a description that they're looking for, it's basically useless. Thankfully, Uraraka manages a decent one in his favor, having seen Shigaraki as well. It's broad, less detailed than Izuku probably would have been able to give, but he still can't seem to make his voice work. His heart hammers freely in his chest at the thought. He'd never had a problem talking before. Why now? Why does he freeze up every time he wants to say something? What happens now? Kirishima asks one of the officers watching over them, the one with the catquirk, seriously hanging by Izuku's opposite side to the one that Uraraka hadn't stayed from. We have a detective involved in the League of Villains case en route. He'd like to ask Midoriya-kun a couple of questions and maybe get a statement from him if he feels up to it. He'll escort Midoriya-kun to the precinct until we can get a hold of his guardians, and the rest of you who were uninvolved in the case will be escorted home by police personnel for safety measures. An officer will contact your guardians in case of the situation, and we'll ask for contact information in case we need it. What about me? Uraraka asks sharply, eyeing the officer. I saw him too. Shouldn't I go to the station as well? That won't be necessary. Izuku turns his head, and of course it's Detective Tsukuji that's jogging towards them. We've already gotten your statement, and according to that, you were only around for the tail end of the conversation, right? Uraraka frowns but gives a light nod. The detective takes it in stride, continuing. Besides, as of now, the safest place for you students is to be at home with your guardians. I know you're all heroic students, but right now, without provisional licenses, you're technically just civilians, and it's our duty to ensure you're all safe and protected. Tsukuchi flashes a disarming half-smile around the teenagers. I know you're all worried about Midoriya, but the safest place for him following this is at the police station. The 1A students still don't look particularly pleased at the thought of their classmate going to the station alone, but Tsukuuchi seems to anticipate this, taking his hat off and holding it to his chest honestly. I'll keep Midoriya safe until his guardians arrive, I promise. The students look between one another silently before all eyes fall onto Izuku, who just tucks himself closer into himself, and he nods in agreement. Just the slight bow of his head seems to convince his friends that he's going to be all right. Izuku knows that this has more to do with the fact that it's the League of Villains who are involved, a direct lead on All for One, than it does statements and procedure, though, to be fair, Izuku can't find it in himself to recall a procedure for something like this. Still, he knows the detective wants to isolate him from prying peers, and frankly, Izuku's all right with the effort. Well, that is pretty safe, Kaminari frowns, eyeing the detective. Nothing's bad is going to happen at the police station, right? There's a murmur of agreement. All right, then. Tsukuuchi gives a nod, gesturing Izuku up. The teenager stumbles to his feet and joins the detective at his side. You kids sit tight. We'll have some cars ready to escort you home soon. Please text or call your parents if you have any need to already, if you haven't before, and let them know what's happening. Officer Sansa will keep you company until then. We'll be in touch if we need any additional information from any of you. Izuku gives his peers a wave, managing a wavering smile as he turns to follow after the detective. Oboro is all but pressed against Izuku's side, not letting any distance come between them as Izuku is escorted out of the mall and guided to a waiting car that Izuku assumes is Tsukuuchi's personal vehicle, considering it's not a police car. The ghost is so close, but they still don't touch at all. Oboro must be very conscious of it because Izuku sure isn't. The drive is near silent at first. Izuku is sitting in the passenger seat. Oboro had phased into the back seat, leaning along the back of Izuku's seat almost protectively. I've already contacted Aizawa, and I'm sure he's contacted Yamada already, too. Tsukuuchi tells the teenager after they've stopped at a red light. He glances over briefly before focusing on the road again. He should be arriving shortly after us, but I'm not sure about Yamada. You didn't contact All Might first. Izuku's surprised. That's when he finds his voice, and his tone sounds pretty snappy and spiteful, and it's not really his intention. Well, it is, but he didn't mean to be quite so forceful, especially since it's the first thing he said in the last hour. Tsukuuchi glances back over, mouth pressed into a light frown. He redirected his attention back onto the green light overhead, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, almost nervously. I deserve that. I owe you an apology, Midoriya. Izuku turns to look at the detective in surprise. I had no right to tell Yagi about your personal situation, he mutters. I assumed with one for all that the two of you were closer than you were. I thought it was something that your mentor should know, and I realize now that it wasn't my decision to make. I apologize for betraying your trust and inviting someone who had no right to be a part of your situation into it. I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive me. Izuku stays quiet for a long second, staring out the passenger window. Did All Might put you up to this? I know he felt pretty bad after I talked to him. No. The detective lets out a short laugh, shaking his head. He didn't put me up to anything, though he did give me a good scolding for being an idiot after your talk with him. And he was right. You were right. I truly am sorry I let my friendship with him impede on my job to serve and protect you. I won't make the same mistake twice. Izuku searches the detective's face for any dishonesty, and the thought's a little ironic. Searching someone with a lie detector's quirk, their face for any signs of dishonesty, he finds none, not that he expected to find any, so he bows his head in a light nod. Thank you. The betrayals run deep between the detective and the #1 hero, and though Izuku doesn't completely forgive either man yet, he's grateful that they acknowledged that they were wrong and apologized for it. I should be the one thanking you, the detective offers a small smile. You definitely should, Oboro huffs in agreement, his breath ghosting over Izuku's shoulder. Everyone should count themselves lucky that Midoriya Izuku has such a kind heart. The detective makes idle conversation for the rest of the drive, and when they finally arrive at the police station, Detective Tsukuuchi escorts him into his familiar office where Izuku recounts the incident with Shigaraki. Tsukuuchi jots down notes as Izuku speaks, but his answers aren't much different from the statement Araraka already gave. The whole interaction was no more than 10 minutes, and Izuku only really feared for his life a handful of times. He doesn't remember the majority of his talk with the villain, but he honestly tells the detective everything he remembers. Some of it is of importance, while the rest of it is inconclusive. When Izuku's statement had been collected, the detective offers for Izuku to relax on the couch that's pushed up against the wall in the back of his office, while he waits for his guardians to arrive. He also offers for Izuku to have something to drink, but the teen just declines the second offer while taking up on the first. The couch is plush and comfortable, and Izuku takes comfort in silence and stride, curling into himself and squeezing his eyes shut in an attempt to calm his raging thoughts. Oboro sits beside him, close but not close enough to touch him if either of them shifts. He doesn't say much, is still silent, of a comfort at Izuku's side. A small part of Izuku knows the ghost is probably seeking comfort. It had to have been traumatic for him as well, but the larger part of Izuku is focusing on not shutting down. As soon as Izuku sees Shota run into the precinct through Tsukuchi's office window, attention flickering around the room desperately before landing on the office, Izuku feels his chest seize up like it had just after Shigaraki's departure. It feels different this time, though. Despite the past hour of speaking with the detective, as soon as he sees his guardian pulling the office door open without so much as knocking, Izuku feels his throat close up. He'd honestly thought he was over the inability to speak, that it was a one-time thing, so he's not sure why his body tenses up at the thought of forcing out any words. It feels like it physically hurts. His heart hammers in his chest as Shota stands in the doorway, and Izuku's not sure why tears spring to his eyes when he catches Shota's own anxious gaze. Tears blur his vision, but he still sees his guardian's chest lurching with overexerted breaths, and the only thing that Izuku can think to do in that moment is push himself up and cross the room with wobbly, desperate steps. "Problem child," Shota breathes out in relief when he sees the kid in one piece, taking 2 measured steps into the room to meet Izuku. Izuku rushes across the room, hardly aware of the detective that's standing from his desk to greet the pro. Izuku pauses in front of his guardian, and Shota's hand hovers cautiously at Izuku's sides like he's not sure quite what he should be doing. Izuku makes the first move for him, closing the space between them as tears collect in the corners of his eyes. He pushes his head close, closing the distance completely, as he lets his forehead press against the guardian's sternum. His hands grab fistfuls of Shota's hoodie, and he feels arms lace around his body, one just below his shoulders, and the other cupping his head to Shota's chest. "You're okay," Shota tells him lowly but gently, holding the teenager securely against himself. The hand not cupping Izuku's head drags slowly and with even lines up and down his spine. "You're all right, Izuku. It's okay." Izuku muffles a sob as phantom feelings of fingers ghost across his neck. He buries his face deeper in the material of Shota's hoodie, and he feels the man tighten his hold protectively. Izuku listens to Shota's soft words, a repeated mantra of, "You're okays," and "I'm here's," and "It's okays." He listens to his guardian's pounding heart, and tries to follow the enunciated breathing pattern that Shota's drawing out for Izuku's sake. Izuku doesn't know why he's breaking down now, why he physically can't contain the sobs, why this feels so much different from just after Shigaraki had left, why he's so desperate to be close to Shota. He doesn't know why he feels so safe with his guardian's arms wrapped around him, or why he thought of letting go of Shota right now. It makes him feel like he can't breathe. He pushes his face closer, nuzzling his cheek against the soft material of the sweatshirt. Izuku hears a soft shushing sound as fingers card through his hair. He faintly hears the sound of a door easing shut, but pays it no mind. He feels himself being guided, and he knows his knees bend, and then he's sitting. He's tucked into Shota's side, hugging him, with the man having his arm over his shoulder. Izuku has never felt more like a child than he does now, clinging to his guardian for comfort in a way that he doesn't remember ever doing to his mother, but he can't find it in himself to care. He can't seem to stop crying. He feels so overwhelmed, and he doesn't know why he's suddenly so scared, why he's terrified. His tongue feels heavy in his mouth, and his breathing is so hard. He feels Shigaraki's hands on him, phantom but suffocating. He feels pressure around his neck that's not there. Those gruesome images of Asui being turned to dust, and Shota's elbow flaking away, swirling with the thought that that could have been him. It could have been his throat. If Shigaraki had more time or less patience, Izuku might not be here right now. So he clings to one of the only people who'd ever protected him without regard for their own life. He clings to the comfort of his guardian, who's been nothing but helpful, who has time and time again proven himself to be different than every single adult Izuku had ever met in his 15 years of life before attending Yuuei. He clings, and he doesn't let himself think of anything else besides how safe and comfortable and protected he feels, wrapped in his guardian's arms, how Shota holds him just as tightly, face pressed in Izuku's curls. He doesn't care that he's curled into his teacher's side. He doesn't care that this had been any other situation. He'd be beside himself at his lack of maturity. He doesn't care that he's supposed to be a hero in training. He listens to Shota telling him that he'll be okay, that he's safe. He holds on to those soft promises like he clutches at Shota's sweater. He can hardly focus on anything but that he can hold on to. Conversation happens around him, soft and hardly audible, or maybe he's just not in the state to be picking up on it. Some he retains, but most he doesn't. They talk about him. Tsukuchi mumbles something about Izuku seeming fine. On the drive over and giving his statement and answering the questions, Shota mumbles something back about panic attacks and delayed trauma responses. There's a period of time where he doesn't remember anything. Nothing but his guardian's embrace, and then Shota's talking softly directly to him. The man's promising that Hisashi's on his way, and he doesn't know why until he realizes he'd been asking for him. When Hisashi arrives with the car, Shota cautiously peels himself away from Izuku's grip. The teen knows he whimpers, grasping desperately, but Shota just helps him up and then tucks him under his arm again. "Take care of him." Tsukuchi's voice sounds worried, and Izuku faintly realizes that he'd broken down completely in the man's office. It's a thought he'll be embarrassed about later, he's sure, but now he can't care less. Shota grunts in response, leading Izuku out the door. Tsukuchi follows them, through the precinct, shielding away any prying officer gazes as he walks at the teen's other side. The man pauses when they reach the doors, hesitating. "I didn't know you were such a softy, Eraserhead." The detective mumbles half-heartedly in lieu of a goodbye, and Shota offers nothing but a glare in return. "Come on, kid," Shota says instead of replying to the detective, his voice soft. "Zashi's waiting for us. I think we're all ready to go home, huh?" Izuku just tucks his face further into the fabric of Shota's sweatshirt, trusting him completely to guide him to the car. Hisashi's leaning against the door of the car when they finally make it through the sea of vehicles. His arms are crossed tightly over his chest and one foot taps anxiously. He sees Oboro, already in the backseat of the car, watching but keeping his distance. Izuku wants nothing more than to hug his friend, and he knows Oboro feels the same. It sucks that he has to wait until they're alone, so neither have to worry about any quirk accidents. The thought of the ghost being alone working through this, what Izuku can only assume was equally as traumatic for him as well, alone, as Izuku's already wavering emotions plummeting. Izuku sniffles, wiping his sleeve across his eyes. It's not fair. "Oh, sunshine," Hisashi breathes out when he sees him, and Izuku's eyes fill with a whole new round of tears, and he tears himself away from Shota and all but collapses into Hisashi's waiting arms. "I was so worried, sweetheart," Hisashi coos, his voice cracking. The blonde-haired man buries his face in Izuku's hair, holding the teen back as tight as the boy is grasping at him. Izuku's tears have once again turned into sobs. "I'm so glad you're okay. You're okay, baby. I know you're scared. It's all right. You're safe, Izuku. You're okay." Izuku feels Shota step closer again, his hand flattening between Izuku's shoulder blades, just above where Hisashi's arms are clutching him tightly. His thumb strokes easy back-and-forth lines, and Izuku's muscles subconsciously relax under his touch. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku sees Shota's other hand on Hisashi's shoulder, giving light, comforting squeezes. "We're all okay," Shota hums softly, tone uncharacteristically gentle. Izuku's not sure if it's for his sake, Hisashi's, or Shota's own. He decides it's probably just to appease all of them equally. That night, when they get home, Shota and Hisashi don't let Izuku out of their sight. The three of them curl up on the couch, cuddled together and sharing one big blanket. The cats invite themselves, Nemo purring up a storm pressed against Shota's chest, Blanket making himself comfortable in Izuku's lap, under the blanket as well, and Fish stretched along the back of the couch between Izuku and Hisashi's heads. His guardians put a film that Oboro, softly suggests that they watch, and the teen hardly makes it 20 minutes in before finally letting his brain shut off. Sandwiched between the two people he trusts the most, with the ghost that he trusts with his life, sitting in the armchair just out of reach of accidental touching. Izuku's not sure he's ever felt so safe. All right, everyone, this concludes Chapter 25 of Yuuei Survival Guide. Chapter 26 will be next, and as always, thank you so much for listening.